high school knows implicitly what social norms are. They're why you wouldn't be caught dead wearing certain outfits. They're why when one person says something, everybody pays attention, even though it's exactly the same thing that someone else said and got completely ignored for. Social norms affect things as minor as what you smell like. If you're a guy, you probably don't smell like flowers. If you're a girl, you probably don't smell like Axe. Tonight, what I want to do is make our implicit understanding of social norms explicit, using the idea of power as a web of dynamic interactions that changes due to how everybody who's part of the system relates to each other. This understanding of social norms lets us see the classroom as a place where students can view themselves as active participants in their own education, and not just passive recipients of an educational experience that's about them without really involving them. The traditional conception of power sees it as a possession, an object. Power is something that one group can have and another group can lack. You can think of it like a pie. Power is something that gets divided up or shared. If you've got the pie, then you control who gets it and how much they get of it. If you've got the pie and I want part of it, I've either got to try to figure out how to convince you to give me some, or maybe I'll just decide to try to take it by force and leave you without any. This idea of power sees it as something that comes naturally with positions of authority. Parents have power. Teachers and administrators have power. Power is hierarchical. It's something that we exercise over people below us in the hierarchy. Parents, administrators, teachers exercise their power over children and students. That should sound fairly familiar. The main problem with that conception of power is that it doesn't actually fit with lived experience. Think about it for a minute. Parents of kids in the room, do you feel like you have the kind of control over your children that I've just described? If you're like me or any other parent I've ever talked to, one of the most terrifying moments of your life is when you realize exactly how little power you have in relation to your children. You can give as many rules as you want. You can set as many homework restrictions, you can tell your kids when to come home from their friends' houses, but when it comes right down to it, it's up to the kid whether they're going to do it or not. You can have the most elaborate system of rewards and punishments imaginable, but if you have a child that just won't cooperate with the system, there's nothing you can do about it. Kids, you probably don't experience yourself as lacking power the way that I've described it. For one thing, you know perfectly well by this point in time in your lives that you can break the rules. In fact, you probably choose sometimes to break the rules. You know exactly what the consequences are going to be, and you decide that the benefits are worth the cost you're going to have to pay. Long story short, children, kids, students have power and exercise power in the same way that people that we traditionally think of as in positions of authority do. Lived experiences like this are what led the French theorist Michel Foucault to posit a different conception of power. Power instead as a web or network. The way Foucault thought of power is like the Facebook login page. So for those of you who just stay logged in all the time and can't remember what it looks like, it's a map of the world. And it has people's faces all over it, and it has lines that connect those faces. Power is the web of connection. It's generated, it's sustained, and it's changed through the interactions of everyone in the system. This concept of power is non-hierarchical. It doesn't see power as a matter of one group having something and exercising it over another group. Instead, power is something that's generated from within, from below, from above. It's this dynamic and complex phenomenon. And it's something that every single person in the system takes an active part in creating. Perhaps the best example I know of how this system of power works is the example of a substitute teacher. If power were just a possession, an object that one group had and another group lacked, then substitute teaching would be the easiest job in the world. Somebody else has already made your lesson plan for you. Students are all there in the class. All you'd have to do is come in and use the power given to you by the school system to teach the class. But everybody here who's ever had or been a substitute teacher knows that's not how it goes. Instead, what happens? The minute the substitute teacher walks in that room, the students start to size them up. And they start to test them in little ways. And what happens over the course of the period or the day depends entirely on how that system of interactions develops. Right? Worst case scenario, the final bell rings and the substitute teacher is crying in a corner while the kids play video games and talk on their phones. Best case scenario, maybe the teacher is lecturing calmly and the students are dutifully taking notes. Usually it's somewhere in between. But the point is that the example of the substitute teacher shows you exactly how dynamic and fluid this network of interactions is. So what does this have to do with the idea of social norms in the classroom, school, reimagined? Well, in short, the concept of power that I've just given you, the alternative concept of power, is one that gives us a way of understanding what social norms are and how they function in a way that can help students see themselves as actively participating in their education. So, think of social norms as paths in the web of power. As certain kinds of patterns of interactions become common, they acquire a certain kind of significance. Take an example as basic as women shaving their legs today. 100 years ago, women shaving their legs was considered completely scandalous. In fact, women shaving their legs and wearing shorter skirts in the 1920s started in part as an act of defiance against the social norms of femininity in place at the time. Gradually, the practice became more accepted and widespread, especially as, for example, corporations and advertisers realized that they could sell women razors and hair removal products. Eventually, women shaving their legs became a central social norm for femininity in Western culture. And that's where we are today. That's how social norms work. They're part of how we identify ourselves as members of certain groups or subgroups. If you're a woman in Western culture today and you shave your legs, part of what you're doing is identifying yourself as female. If you don't shave your legs and you're a female in Western culture, this isn't a neutral action. Part of what you're doing is identifying yourself as countercultural in some kind of way. Maybe you're a hippie. Maybe you're a feminist. Maybe you're a lesbian, right? But you're something. If I describe to you someone who does yoga, drinks green tea lattes, and drives a minivan, you immediately have a certain picture in your head of who this person is and what they're like. Race, age, gender, class. Social norms are part of how we create what theorists call social intelligibility. It's how we make sense of the communities that we live in. So how does this fit with a classroom? Well, social norms are fluid. They're created, they're sustained, they're changed by the ways that the people in particular groups interact with each other. One of the most important functions of social norms is that they consistently advantage people who conform to them and disadvantage people who fight against them. Take, for example, a high school age guy who comes to school reeking of Axe body spray, right? This is socially intelligible. It makes sense, right? In fact, there was a recent Slate article that described the phenomenon of walking into a high school stairwell after phys ed and getting hit with a wall of Axe, right? It's a really common social norm. On the other hand, in a world where guys are expected to smell like cool metal or ice, wind, and freedom, if you show up, 7th grade guy, you're going to probably be seriously socially disadvantaged for this. Unless, of course, you manage to do it ironically. Part of what this is supposed to illustrate is that the existence, the creation, the strengthening of social norms is a vital part of how you experience your life in general, but then also specifically for students in the classroom. So, high school students here today, I want to challenge you to do 3 things. First, I want to challenge you to pay attention and reflect on what the social norms are in your classrooms. What kinds of behaviors get rewarded by laughter, smiles, nods, respect? What kind of social behaviors, what kinds of norms get consistently punished by eye rolls, sighs, turning away, right? Pay attention to what the social norms are. Think about your own body language even. How do you sit in class? When do you move? How does your teacher deal with these kinds of things? What do they respond to? What do they draw back from? So, like I said, the first thing is to reflect and pay attention to what the social norms are. The second thing I want to challenge you guys to do is to evaluate those social norms. Social norms in themselves are inherently neutral, right? They're just part of how we make sense of the world. They're patterns of behavior. But for individual people and individual communities, they can be better or worse. So evaluate the social norms that you've identified. What kinds of behaviors help you learn? What kind of behaviors make you shut down and stop paying attention? And then, finally, picture yourself as a node in the web of power. Like I said before, power isn't a thing. Power is this network that's created through the interactions of everybody in that system. And everybody sitting in a classroom is a node in that network. One of the reasons this is so important is because if you feel powerless, you're likely to not try as hard, right? You're not going to engage fully. You're not going to participate fully. You're going to do things that implicitly undermine you. You're always a node on this web of power. But if you feel passive or you feel passive aggressive, as we all know, we all tend towards that sometimes, right? If you see yourself as just a passive recipient of your education, Those are the social norms that you're going to be reinforcing. That's how you're going to be using your existence as a node on this web of power. So, in closing, what I want to do is encourage all of you to think of yourselves as these shining little nodes, right, in this web of power. You are not a bystander in your own education. You are an integral part of the classroom dynamics that you're part of. So think about what norms you'd like to see, and then work to try to make them happen. Thank you.